Audrey Faye Hendricks, the 9-year-old who stared down Jim Crow. Picture this scenario. You're 9 years old. Your legs barely touch the floor when you sit in a church pew. You still sleep with a doll, hum songs to yourself, and need help tying your Sunday shoes. But today, you're not going to school or a birthday party. You're going to jail. You walk out of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, singing, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round," knowing full well the police are waiting to arrest you. You've been warned. You've packed a sandwich. You know your parents won't be there when the metal doors close behind you. That 9-year-old was real. Her name was Audrey Faye Hendricks, and in the spring of 1963, she became the youngest known person arrested during the Civil Rights Movement. While most children were playing hopscotch or reading comic books, Audrey was putting her childhood on the line to take a stand against Jim Crow. Her decision wasn't just brave, it was revolutionary. To understand the gravity of what Audrey did, you have to understand what she was walking into, and what so many black families were up against in 1963, the heavy hand of Jim Crow. By the early 1960s, the United States was still choking under the weight of Jim Crow, an unofficial yet brutally enforced system of racial apartheid. Born out of the ashes of Reconstruction and legally sanctioned by the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson, which established the doctrine of separate but equal, Jim Crow laws spread like wildfire across the South. But they were never about equality. They were about control. Black Americans couldn't eat at the same restaurants, use the same bathrooms, drink from the same water fountains, or attend the same schools as white citizens. In many towns, even looking a white person in the eye could result in harassment, or worse. Voter suppression was rampant. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and sheer violence were used to keep black people from the ballot box. And justice was a myth. White juries rarely convicted white perpetrators who committed crimes against black victims. The 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education, declared racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. But nearly a decade later, many schools in the Deep South remained all white by force or intimidation. Civil rights legislation had been proposed, but little had been enforced. The federal government often turned a blind eye. And in this climate of fear and resistance, the city of Birmingham, Alabama, was one of the most violently segregated places in America. Birmingham, the stronghold of segregation. Known by many as Bombingham because of the frequent bombings of black homes and churches, Birmingham was ruled with an iron fist by Public Safety Commissioner Eugene "Bull" Connor, a man who proudly aligned himself with white supremacist ideals and enforced segregation with attack dogs, fire hoses, and mass arrests. It was in this hostile city that civil rights leaders decided to launch Project C in 1963, the C standing for confrontation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, believed that if they could break segregation in Birmingham, it would send a message across the nation. But adults in the city were terrified. Marching could mean losing your job, getting evicted, or being lynched. So King and his team turned to an unexpected army: children, teenagers, and even younger. Audrey's march into history. On May 2, 1963, Audrey Faye Hendricks became one of the youngest and bravest among them. Dressed in her Sunday best, she stepped off the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church alongside thousands of other children, lifting her voice to sing, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round." She was the only student from her elementary school to participate. Her parents, Joe and Lola Hendricks, watched from a distance, both proud and afraid, as their daughter marched straight into the arms of the police. She was arrested for parading without a permit and taken to the juvenile hall at Birmingham City Jail. Inside, conditions were far from humane. Audrey recalled being held in a cramped room with 15 to 20 other girls. There was no change of clothes, no fresh underwear, no toothbrush. She had to use the bathroom in a shared space and sleep on a cold mattress. It would be nearly a week before she was released, on Wednesday, May 8th, alongside more than 500 other children. And then, just like that, she returned to school. No teacher asked her about what had happened. No classmates brought it up. "I was just one of the kids, as everybody else was," she later said. "It didn't dawn on me that it was a big deal." But it was. Audrey's arrest was part of a historic series of youth-led marches now known as the Children's Crusade, protests that ignited national outrage and changed the course of the civil rights movement. What the world saw. As more and more children filled Birmingham's jails, police grew desperate. Bull Connor's forces turned dogs and fire hoses on the young marchers, knocking them to the ground and dragging them away. When the city ran out of space in its jails, children were herded into livestock pens at the fairgrounds. The televised images of black children being assaulted by uniformed officers, soaked by high-pressure hoses, and cornered by snarling dogs were so powerful they shook America to its core. The brutality forced millions of people, black and white, to reckon with the cruelty of segregation in a way speeches never could. It lit a fire under the federal government, pushing President Kennedy to call civil rights a moral issue. Audrey's act, small as it may have seemed to her, was part of a tidal wave of courage that helped lead to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. A childhood interrupted, what it meant to be 9 in 1963. At 9 years old, most American children were not thinking about injustice. They were not thinking about the Constitution or federal court cases. They were thinking about jump ropes, comic books, birthday parties, and Saturday morning cartoons. For white children in 1963, that carefree childhood was expected. They didn't need to worry about whether their school books were outdated hand-me-downs. They didn't fear being beaten or spit on for walking through the wrong neighborhood. They could drink from any fountain, go to any restaurant, and see their faces reflected in TV heroes, teachers, and presidents. They had the privilege of innocence. But for black children, especially in the South, childhood came with limits. Audrey didn't just live in a segregated city. She lived in a city where black children were taught early on that their lives could be taken for walking too fast, talking too loudly, or looking the wrong way at a white person. And while Audrey's white peers were playing hopscotch or practicing for the school play, she was preparing herself for handcuffs. She wasn't just different for her age. She was different for any age. What was Audrey thinking? A window into her courage. Trying to imagine the mindset of a 9-year-old child who willingly chose to go to jail is no easy task. Most children at that age are just beginning to understand fairness in personal terms, whether their sibling got a bigger slice of cake or if their teacher handed out punishments equally. But Audrey Faye Hendricks was thinking on a whole other level. She wasn't just navigating playground rules. She was stepping into the battlefield of racial justice. Audrey's choice wasn't made in a vacuum. She was raised in a household where justice was not just talked about, it was lived. Her mother, Lola Hendricks, worked directly with civil rights leaders, and their home served as a safe meeting space for the movement. Martin Luther King was a fellow visitor at her home as a child as well. Audrey grew up listening to adults speak boldly about segregation, protest strategies, and freedom. She wasn't shielded from the truth. She was invited to witness it, and in time, to act on it. The bravery it takes to walk away from your parents, knowing you'll be arrested and put in a jail cell, can't be overstated. Even adults hesitated. But Audrey saw something bigger than fear. She saw injustice, and felt compelled to confront it. Her courage didn't come from recklessness. It came from clarity. A clip follows from the late Audrey herself in 1995.
And it's just a part of it. So that's how I got involved.
So you were simply surrounded by it. You were, in fact, a child of the movement.
Yes.
From a modern perspective, psychologists might describe her strength as moral maturity beyond her years. But for Audrey, it was simpler than that. She knew what was right, and she chose it. That's not a scientific anomaly. That's the mark of a leader. Lynching and legal terror. While Audrey's courage lit up the nation, black children in the South were still being killed simply for being black. Less than 5 months after her arrest, the very church Audrey marched from, 16th Street Baptist, was bombed by white supremacists on a Sunday morning. 4 little girls were killed: Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Denise McNair. They were Audrey's age. They could have easily been Audrey. Lynching was still an active terror. Between 1882 and 1968, more than 4,700 people were lynched in the U.S., the vast majority of them black. No federal anti-lynching law existed in 1963. Many killers walked free, shielded by all-white juries and local law enforcement who shared their ideology. These were the stakes Audrey was walking into, a reality where children were jailed, bombed, or lynched for being on the wrong side of power. Audrey's quiet legacy. Audrey went on to live a quiet life. She became an educator and continued to believe in the power of justice and nonviolence. She passed away in 2009, but her story resurfaced through the award-winning children's book, The Youngest Marcher, by Cynthia Levinson. Today, her act is often told as a footnote in the larger civil rights movement, but it shouldn't be. Because in a world where so many people stayed silent, Audrey spoke out, not with words, but with action. She put her body on the front lines of a war against hate and refused to be invisible. She was not just the youngest marcher, she was the spark. This story is dedicated to the brave men, women, and children, then and now, who risk everything to demand justice. Rest in power, Audrey Faye Hendricks. Scope News sources. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. This report draws from primary civil rights archives, FBI documents on Birmingham in the 1960s, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Additional sources include the King Institute at Stanford University, The Youngest Marcher by Cynthia Levinson, Eyes on the Prize, the Library of Congress's Children's Crusade Project, and educational materials from the Equal Justice Initiative on segregation and lynching in the Deep South. Special thanks to the oral history interview with Audrey Hendricks at Miles College on May 25, 1995. All rights belong to BCRI, Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. This first-hand testimony helped preserve her powerful story in her own words. The clip is used under fair use. Legal disclaimer. This content is intended for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes. It reflects historical research, documented events, and publicly available information to the best of our ability. Viewer discretion is advised, as the subject matter may involve racial violence, systemic injustice, or other sensitive topics. Scope News aims to reflect history accurately, but acknowledges limitations in image licensing, archival availability, and first-person accounts.